Okay, hello people. It's transport in the time of COVID, 24th of November update. Because of the problems with lag on when I had animations flying in last week, I'm doing an animations free version, and so I'll just have the slide up and you'll have to concentrate on what I'm saying. Okay, so usual thing, do email me with any bits of information. If you want the slides before they go up, I can send them to you. Right, oh dear, still some animations, but yeah, I just reminded you of our famous Friday the 13th. That's still overhanging everything. The Department for Transport active travel funding phase 2 went in as part of an overall transport approach, which has still got loads of road building. Tomorrow, we're going to get the Chancellor's spending review. So, you know, what would be really nice is if the road building program is cut back, but well, you know, don't hold your breath. Right, it's 42 years since Douglas Adams's joke about cars being the dominant life form on the planet. What's heartbreaking is that it's even more applicable today, and the cars are now bigger, heavier, and far more dangerous to everyone else. The 42 is because Adams had a thing about the number 42. If you look it up on his Wikipedia entry, you'll see. Yeah, and a lot of stuff about the cost benefit analysis and justification for building of highways. And yours truly and Brian will be here. It's the Active Travel Academy Media Awards 2020. If you go to that link, you can get on. We've got a special award, which we've been already interviewed for. And I would like to thank you along with Brian. First of all, Steve for doing his stuff. Also other people in the sport team like Simon Still, who've helped with collecting the slides and presentations, everybody who's done presentations, and of course, all the ordinary people who tune in every week and take part. So thank you, thank you, thank you very much from us. And do tune in on Thursday. Okay, contents today, usual, and the general theme is about being underwhelmed. Plus also, of course, low traffic neighborhoods, continuing sagas. Right, so the underwhelming thing is the 10-point plan for the environment published by the government, 10-point green plan with supposedly 250,000 jobs. So one of the points is building hundreds and thousands of miles of segregated cycle lane, creating more low traffic neighborhoods, expand school streets. Already started this with 250 million spending this year as part of the PM's announcement to spend another 1.75 billion over this parliament over the next 4 years. A new body, Active Travel England, will hold the budget, inspect schemes, assess local authorities. And there will be a national program of support to increase the uptake of electric bikes. Roger Geffen and Laura Laker were on BBC Radio 4 talking about this. So there's your 1,000 miles of safe and direct cycling and walking networks. And by 2025, cycle training will be available to every school kid and adult who wants it. The must read, I'm repeating from last week. It's the new way of measuring danger on the road, what kills or who kills most on the roads. The PACTS report, which I had a bit of a hand in. And next week, I'm going to try and do an item on measuring road danger, and hopefully Dave Davis from PACTS will attend as well. because I will be referring to the report. So there's the quote from me about what road danger reduction is. Okay, here are your things to read. Now, first of all, Laura Laker thing on how to set up a low traffic neighborhood. There's your read. Next up, Chartered Institute of Highways and Transportation response to planning for the future. I mentioned that last week. Also last week, I mentioned the Scottish Active Nation Commissioner's report, Lee Craigie's report on Scotland. New for this week, John Burke's got an article in the Huffington Post on electric cars and why there aren't enough. And it was nice to see Keir Starmer, who the week before had knocked down a cyclist while making a totally unnecessary journey in his car, was saying LTNs are good. And yes, there'll be displaced traffic, but it'll disappear and a good thing. So that was important. Public Health England framework, which includes active travel. Do have a look at that. That's new this week. Repeating what I said last week, 3 articles, Cycling UK opposing hate mails, LTNs and cycle lanes slow emergency services down. Got a video on myths about cycle lanes, and Peter Walker also does a demolition job on that. And add on to that, new research from Cycling UK finds that the public overestimates opposition to new bike lanes by 50%. So that's a good new read for you. Don't forget the Walking and Cycling Alliance report. Go to that for your evidence. In red, yes, that's new this week. Today, the speed compliance statistics for the first 6 months of this year came out from the Department for Transport. Guess what? The proportion of cars exceeding the speed limit during the UK coronavirus lockdown was higher than for the equivalent period of 2019. Already talked about why that's the case. If you remove lots of cars, then the remaining ones will have drivers who will drive faster. There's a petition for something called Tom's Law on giving police the power to suspend driving licenses on the spot with drunk drivers. Have a look at that. Repeat the Twitter thread from Dr. Greg Marsden about whether car use has gone back to normal. This week, new, there's another emissions scandal. Plug-in hybrids have tests showing far higher pollution than claimed. Guess what? Yeah, CPRE have got a little report on tarmac and be damned. The parliamentarians have got a briefing paper for MPs on cycling. There's a must-read thread on congestion from Councillor Burke, referring to a Transport for London report called London Stalling. Old style long-term activist John Stewart, who's involved in the anti-road building protests in the 90s, got hold of me, and it's a report he's done for the UK Noise Association. Last Thursday, there was a webinar run by London Cycling Campaign on the climate emergency and what can be done about it. That should have been recorded and will be available to be viewed. Diversity page, what's new is a report from the Disabled Doctors Network. Barriers faced by disabled cyclists from a personal perspective. Okay, and yeah, we're still at about 75% male attendance on Ideas with Beers. If anybody has any good ideas on how to change that, do weigh in at the end of this presentation with your ideas. The delay slide is now the where are we after Friday the 13th of November. Just to summarize, the government commitment for reallocation of road space to active travel continues, albeit late. Main difference is there has to be a lot of emphasis on consultation. There will be more time for implementation beyond the end of this financial year. We've got various tables on the percentages of bids which were given. There's an issue about Part 6 Road Traffic Act in 2004 for people outside London, which we'll no doubt refer to in the report on school streets, and still a 27+ billion pound road building programme. There was a letter from Bike is Best Cycling UK and London Cycling Campaign calling for Active Travel England to be set up swiftly, which was sent to the Minister on August the 28th, and it still hasn't been set up. In London, oh, got some animations. All right. Camden is going to create some additional cycling. I haven't done anything from outside London because I haven't received anything. So it's a London special. Camden to create additional cycling contraflows in Fitzrovia streets. Hackney, here's a very important report. LTNs have not caused a rise in nearby main road traffic, the early analysis shows. Do go to that to fend off the naysayers. Yesterday, there was a report in the Evening Standard on new cycle lanes from TfL, but they have this heading, Cycle Lane Wars. Well, that's not really very helpful if you want to avoid confrontation. Westminster, yes, I mentioned that there was a low traffic neighbourhood a couple of weeks ago, which is due to go in around Hyde Park. Last week it was axed, and this week the residents who want it are fighting back. The people who oppose it have talked about it being an act of violence, and they are being kettled. You know what being kettled is by the police when they force you up against a wall and make life hard for you. So that's the kind of stupid language from well-off, well-heeled residents who don't like a bit of restriction on their motoring. And there's a nice thread from Leo Murray on drivers losing it with crazy language and being vandals, which you can go to. Right, here's a response to the Richmond Park consultation by Royal Parks. Richmond Park cyclists' response to the Royal Parks consultation on their movement strategy trials in Richmond Park. And they're asking for less car use. And do have a look at that letter. And if you're in London, do send your response to the Royal Parks consultation. Lambeth, here is Isabelle Clément of Wheels for Wellbeing, who has presented on Ideas with Beers, a big disabled cycling and walking activist. And here she is on the cycle lane in Lambeth, which has got a nice logo of a hand cyclist like her. So she likes that. It was a bit of a kerfuffle about it because some wheelchair users were saying that because you've got a logo of a wheelchair, we will be expected not to be on the footway and we will have to be on the cycle lane, which we might not want to be on. So there's been a bit of fuss about that. Anyway, Isabel likes that. Southwark, yeah, here's a nice picture apart from this thing, whatever it is. Bermondsey Street. And that's, as you can see, closed off to motor vehicles, and some rather interesting sort of concrete-y type, planter type things there, which look quite interesting. And anyway, it's cycling and walking going down Bermondsey Street, which is in central London. Ah, yes, now, here is something from London Borough of Islington, a nice map of the traffic filters for a new low traffic neighborhood in the Highbury West, Highbury Fields. And it's supposed to be, according to the local activists there, when that comes in, which will be starting next Monday, that will make quite a big difference. It's quite a big area and it should be quite dramatic in its effect. In Hounslow, they did a door-to-door survey showing a lot of support for Staveley Road low traffic neighbourhood. They didn't actually give numbers in the survey, but they just went door to door, and they seemed to get a lot of support. Always helpful to do that, although of course the idiots aren't going to listen to you, whatever you say. Now, I did have this last week in Chiswick. Someone had put up this notice supporting the local low traffic neighbourhood, and they were told to remove this notice by Hounslow Council. So I don't know if anybody's got any more news about this, but that's what happened last week. Hackney, I'm putting this up again, this thread, because it's Police Sergeant James Higgins explaining why he supports the school street and how the filter doesn't affect his ability to respond to emergencies. Nice bit of video there, do use it. Oh dear, it's Rupert Huck MP. It's an article in the Sunday Times talking about low traffic neighborhood and how it's terrible. And what's happened, I've got a slide here, and it's for in which I and Councillor John Burke respond to her. And main thing there in blocks, Councillor Burke says, in recent days, a number of Hackney's new traffic counters have been broken and a camera has been subjected to £20,000 plus worth of damage. Labour councillors, actually including himself, are receiving abuse and death threats. So it makes total sense that a Labour MP would refer to LTN supporters as a vicious Lycra brigade. And he, just very quickly go over it. It says, she's saying the only test is local popularity. She doesn't mention the massive increase in driving on London roads since 2009 due to sat-navs, etc. There isn't evidence, she doesn't have proper evidence about the LTNs causing more problems. LTNs have been around for about 45 years. Going on about road tax, etc. My view is to say, what about her alternatives, apart from something about road tax? She says she simply wants more consultation, which is what the government are asking for, and council support in emergency measures during an emergency. That's it. And does she have any actual examples of the Lycra mob being vicious? She should tell and inform the Met if so. And was the once compliant community she refers to one in which all drivers actually were complying with the law? And she talks about people being alienated. Well, of course, there are people who want to drive where, when, how, why, and when they want, and they will be alienated by anything which is reducing motor traffic. Anyway, so that's a few responses to her article. I looked at it again, and actually she's got other things wrong as well, but there you go. And again, here's somebody on Facebook saying that Novichok should be given out to those putting cycle lanes on our roads. Stay safe. Thank you. So I do hope someone's got the idiot files somewhere with all the various nasty and offensive things in them. Here's your reading. Just flick over it again. Yeah, still got the hit and run petition, longer trailers petition, and legally binding UK air quality targets petition, pavement parking petition, consultations gone in. And there's your various bits of reading. I've added on a whole chunk from last week of stuff specifically on phase 2. You need to reference all those things. And finally, on there's the network management duty guidance with a few takeaways. So you should have that all in your files. finally, on the car advertising or subvertising front, there's a guy called Damien Slash, who's done videos on the man car and also the electric man car. And you really have to go to those links and look at the videos. They're very, very good.
Oh, well, let me get, so I'll just tell you the format. So first of all, thanks for inviting us. I'm here, I don't know if he's turned up here, but I'm here with, normally, virtually with a friend of mine, Vin Sumner. I'm representing his company. It's a company called Pixelmill. So we both, me and Vin, both know Steve Connor pretty well from other work and stuff. So thanks for inviting us. Let me do a little bit of an introduction on me, just as much as anything to manage expectations. So I'm going to show you some sort of 3D modeling, you know, which can be viewed in virtuality, but I'm not a virtual reality expert. So I'll show you it in the spirit of the art of the possible, really. But I'm not a VR expert, but Pixelmill, Vin's company, does have VR experts. So bear that in mind. I'll do my best to answer your questions, but it's not my bag, really. I'm here because I work part-time with Vin, and I'm running a project that I'll talk to you about here, really, and can show you sort of live stuff, really. My background is I've been in the broad sustainability space since the 90s, more from like a corporate sustainability, basically. So I'm a consultant by trade. And my sort of in that broad sustainability arena, my focus always has been like finance and investing, really, how you do a business case for sustainability. That's something I've done for 20 or 30 years. And in other areas around strategic decisions, my PhD is all around strategic decisions and sustainability, basically. So I also, now that I've got a bit of a feel for this event, I'm based in Liverpool, as hopefully you can tell. My friend Vin's business is based in Manchester, in the northern quarter near Piccadilly there. And we work with clients around the country and in Europe and so on. But I'm based in Liverpool, and for about 10, 15 years, I was a full-time member and coordinator for Liverpool Friends of the Earth. So we did loads of active travel stuff, and I'm guessing there'll be loads of common names that people know on here and everything. But anyway, that gives you a bit of a feel for me. Let me share my screen. Oh, and the format of this, so I'll try and go through it as quick as possible to leave as much for Q&A, because there's a bit of a slide set which I'll skim through, to be honest, because it'll just help to at least frame it, to give you a flavor for what we're talking about. And then I'll show you two of these 3D models on the screen, so we can actually see there's two cities, Copenhagen, everyone knows, and the city of Sabadell, which is just outside Barcelona. About 300,000 strong population. We've worked with them before on another project, and so I'll show you their 3D models and you'll get a feel for it. And roughly the area that this is in, to keep in your mind, is another area that I'm not an expert in. It's in the area of collaborative design and all that sort of thing. That's what interests me about this, because I know of collaborative design as a thing, but again, I'm not claiming to be an expert in it, but I think I'd like to share this with you, and then I'm really interested in feedback, basically. So let me share my screen. If I just share that. Okay. Can you guys see slides now?
Yep.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so, and if oh yeah. So again, I'll do this really quickly. So again, just so everyone knows, so the company is called Pixelmill, based in Manchester. And again, we're always interested in further discussions and so on, especially paid work. So what we've got is a thing. Where this came from is a number of different angles, but basically, so we're an SME, and we work with Manchester City Council, and we work with local authorities, we work with private enterprise and so on, big businesses. And we've been doing this sort of work for a while about how you use this sort of technology in different spaces. And so before my time, I've known Vim for about 10 years, but we've been working together for about 4 or 5. And there's a link here. So again, you guys can follow these links later, but about 5 or 6 years ago, we did this work for Transport for London. Yeah, so go on, let's see if we can, oh no, I can't do that. I'll do the link another time. And basically what it was a 3D model of London, Victoria. And you can see a picture of it there. It sort of looked like that, and then there were avatars in that space. And then you could press a button, you could change various parameters, you know, to reflect peak rates, travel, off-peak travel, you know, the mix of commuters versus tourists. You know, commuters would travel quicker, and in more of a straight line, tourists would wander around a bit and that sort of thing. And so we did this 6 years ago, and it's a really nice piece of work. And so that's some of the background to this. So rapid, the idea of rapid, it's a bit of a clumsy acronym about rapid prototyping in 3D. And where we've been coming into it is we've been doing work very much at the end of the planning cycle. So when there's been consultation schemes, like we did work with Salford, there was a big modelling scheme of cycle pathways, new cycle schemes and stuff. And we came at the end, and Salford got us involved to be involved in the consultation process. And so it's all interesting and so on. But the trouble with that is you're at the end of the process, when frankly, you know, there might have been 12, 18 months gone. Again, people who know this better than me can tell me how long these things typically take. Loads of money, loads of sunk cost, a load of reason basically not to change things, frankly. So the rapid idea is, why don't we do consultation very, very early? You know, to put it in simple terms, when any sort of scheme is in the, let's call it the fag packet stage, somebody's roughly thinking, how could we address this area? And they're trying to come up with different ideas. You know, let's try and introduce that. So that's what this thing we call rapid is about rapid prototyping, but then doing that in 3D. And the logic for that is that most people understand 3D. You know, we live in a 3D world, whereas engineers' plans and so on, I'll show you something like this in a minute to reinforce the point. I don't understand engineers' plans. So engineers can look at a 2D plan and it makes perfect sense. To me, it's very hard for me to understand plans for even next door developments and things like that. So that's sort of where we're at. We're saying, get right to the start of the process, quickly create models in 3D. And again, I'll show you these for Sabadell and Copenhagen in a sec. Then use them in different ways. So it could be for consultation. It could be, frankly, you know, internal, in quotes, sort of experts. You know, if this is just planners or, you know, city authorities or something, it could be internal thing. And nobody is saying that that then doesn't go into a more detailed process that manages risk and security and gets engineering precision about the schemes and so on. But these rapid models will be done way up front, basically. So that's the basic idea. Quickly go through this. So we sort of talk of this as a process. So basically define a spatial area. So that we've got two, Copenhagen station that I'll show you in a second, and an area of Sabadell near a roundabout. And this is a Google Maps view of this area. So somehow identify an area that you're interested in. And in the spirit of rapid, i.e. quick, the tighter it's defined, the easier it is to model. You know, if you're going to do 5 square miles, that'll take a while and so on. So you're always playing those sorts of balances and so on. Then quickly create this 3D model. Again, that's just a screenshot, but you'll see the real thing in a sec. Then you can think about adding in other features. So we'll show you in these models, there's avatars. So that's not 7-foot blue people. You know, that's sort of computer AI sort of pedestrians and AI cars, you know, artificial intelligent cars and so on. Again, just in the spirit, none of this is about trying to create a model of reality. It's about creating something that's rich enough to do whatever it's designed to do. So if that's about engaging local citizens, as we did last week in a workshop with Sabadell, and my Catalan is 0. So we had local Sabadell people who were taking people through this process and so on, and they were gathering feedback and getting involved in it, and so whatever makes that 3D scene more engaging for whatever purpose it is, whether it's for internal experts or for external consultation, then you add in those features. But again, try and keep it as simple as possible to be as quick as possible. And then this final stage over here, which I have to just drag the images. So then you can say, well, when we've got that model, well, how are we going to use it? And so obviously in a COVID world, when physical, you know, social distance and stuff is a problem, then 3D models can be done virtually, as we'll show now, basically. So that's that. So quickly give you an overview of this. So in the 2 cases I'll show you now. So the first step of this process, so for Copenhagen, and the cities define this themselves, their interest was Copenhagen Central Station. So they've seen about, and this project started officially July 1 and runs till the end of this year. It's a sort of COVID-focused funding scheme, basically funded by somebody called the European Institute of Technology, who ultimately get the money from the EU and then allocate it out. So we're working on this project with UCL, University College London, the two cities, Sabadell and Copenhagen, and then Fraunhofer as well. And we're in as the SME and the main sort of technical leads and so on. So Copenhagen's focus was Copenhagen Station, and it's mostly about pedestrian flows. So in July, they were seeing, and I think it's still the same now, about 50% down on public transport levels. Sabadell's was a roundabout that you'll see here, and it was about trying to promote, again, relevant to what you were discussing before, promoting cycling basically as a response. So step 2, here's is this 3D model. Again, these are just static screenshots, but you'll see this. Here's static screenshot of the Sabadell scene. Then you see the avatars added in to enrich it, and I'll explain this and make it a bit more real in a sec. Step 4 is then consultation, so however that works. So last week, literally, we did a consultation with Sabadell citizens who were affected and involved in this proposed scheme. So I think, final bit to throw in is one of the things people might have seen, we've done, so another way that we got into this, and Steve, I know, knows this work, is we created this thing called a VR bike. About 4 or 5 years ago it was. So again, there's a link here which you can see later, but basically it's a real bike on a training stand, and this is someone who works for us who's wearing a VR headset, and they then travel virtually. So as they turn the pedals, there's something on the wheels, a piece of electronics that detects the wheel going around. That moves you forward in the virtual model. And there's a device here on the handlebars, if you can see my mouse, that detects the handlebars turning, so that turns you left and right. So you can potentially, and we did this in Sabadell's case, as well as people just seeing, like I'm going to show you now, a 3D model on the screen, you can also potentially experience it in VR if circumstances allow and so on. So that's, if you like, a step 4 plus to try and get a richer experience again of it. Again, some caveats, some people like VR, some people don't. Some people feel a bit seasick after, no time at all. Some people can do it for ages. But yeah, it's worth throwing it in the mix. So can you guys still see my screen? It wasn't just the slides. Yeah, cool. So as a lead into the 3D models, I'll do the Sabadell one first. So this is from our friends in Sabadell, who are city officers over there. One of them is an engineer. This is the proposed scheme for that roundabout that you could see before. So again, I'm sure to engineers who are out there, this probably is quite intuitive for you guys and stuff. But if I didn't know that area, that would just be really unhelpful for me. But obviously it's not designed for me, as it's designed for engineers and so on. So, but this, in some ways, this sort of medium is just quite limited, really. So these red lines are the proposed new cycle scheme. And so the way I sort of describe it is this. If this is almost like the state of the art, and I know there's better ways of doing consultation with actual physical models being built and videos and things and so on. What Rapid is doing is about trying to make this better and make it better very early in the process. So keep that in your mind. Let me now go to here. So again, you can see everything nice and live and dirty. Right. So as this starts, so here is the Sabadell one. And I get a thumbs up again. You still see all this? Yeah, cool, thanks. So here is, let me explode that you can still see that. So again, remember the principle of a rapidly built model. So this is not trying to be photorealistic by any stretch, because we want to do it really quick, is the premise. So the way I normally demonstrate this, let's just take an aerial view first. So if you can remember that roundabout, and I have pretty basic Spanish and no Catalan. So this is Avenida de la Concordia. The main interest that we've got is this road here, which I think runs south, and the city centre is down that way. You can see the demarcated spatial area. So again, it's a tightly sort of defined area. And then the other access is, this is the northern road. This is Avenida de Mata Depera. So it's on this area that we're most interested in looking at things. So you'll see there's other things. So you might, for the engineers among you, you might have been able to see on that 2D plan that there was an underpass there. We're not interested in that at all for this, because we're not modeling the cars really. We're only interested in the cyclist perspective. You'll also see things like we've got some AI cars. So if I go above again, and we had some local on the ground data about spawn rates and sort of flow rates and things like that, which our friends in Sabadell gave us. And so these scales here allow you to change this. So if I show, so we have what we call various spawn locations where these cars come into a scene, and they have different paths that they follow. And again, it's not meant to be this is not a perfect traffic simulator. In many ways, these things are just in there to make it a bit more realistic, really. So if you look at this, if I pump up the car spawn rate here, I forget which way around this is. Just give it a sec. Oh, let me turn it the other way. It's the other way. So if I pump it that way, just again to show the thing. So if I put it to the maximum, and you see just a crazy amount of cars start to come. So again, just to show you how these things can be varied. So if we switch that down, there's also pedestrians you might have seen flowing around the scene here. There's one. So again, these can be varied. Again, these guys sort of have a scale to show them and that sort of thing, and they sort of follow certain paths with a bit of randomization. We've got traffic lights in, but we haven't made the traffic lights work. They're purely visual. In theory, we could make cars respond to traffic lights, and we could have them on cycles. That all starts to slow the process down, which is against the idea of the rapid model. This is more of a visual analytical tool than a heavy duty. It's not trying to replace some of the tools that are out there for doing heavy duty traffic analysis and stuff. Final thing to point out, and it'll be more relevant in the Copenhagen one. If you see this, there's a count here. So this counts the number of pedestrians in the scene in this 3D space. There's some of them as they spawn come in, and as they get to the destination, they exit. So you have a plus and minus sort of stocks and flows thing going on. So let me now sort of return to how we do the demo typically. Is if I return to our main interest and we reset this and so on. And typically, so what I can do now is we've added a button to lock the height to the perspective of a cyclist. So you can't fly anymore. So imagine this is what it looks like at the moment. This, believe it or not, is a bus stop. It's a really weird, this is true, how it works at the moment, really weird raised bus stop. And then you have, so again, if you think you have it bad in UK, Spain are competing with us, for what our friends in Sabadell tell us for cycling unfriendly schemes, really. So there's the bus stop, and then this is the as is in consultant jargon. This is how it looks at the moment. So you've got some bollards and demarcated stuff, and you've got a sort of two-way cycle lane. But at the moment, this scheme just runs out. And so what the whole of this work is about trying to improve this. So at the moment, a cyclist goes on the pavements, sort of gets to the roundabout and competes with pedestrians and everything, and maybe then charges across the bridge and then flies here and waits. The cars seem quite good, and I think these cars have got collision detection, so they shouldn't crash into other cars. You can see there I can go through the trees if I want. We can make things so you can't do that, but again, it just adds complexity, adds time, really. So and there's no cycle lane over here. So quickly, conscious of the time, let me just go back. I'll drive through some cars just to scare you. If you're wearing a VR headset, that would be quite scary. So now what we can do is show options, basically. And when we started this project, this was, again, in consultant jargon, you've got the as is and then the to be. So if you see here, if I do it again, when I press this lanes button on and off, you'll see the cycle lanes appear and disappear. So as I come along here now, we can see the new cycle lanes, and what they've introduced, again, it's still, and our friends in Sabadell say it's still a bit of a crazy scheme. This is actually not so much a 2B, they've actually implemented this now, literally only in the last few weeks. So it's almost more of a before and after than an as is in the 2B. But if all of the stars had aligned, the idea would have been we would have shown people the as is and then say several options and then got their feedback on the best one. And then that option would have maybe gone through further iterations and that sort of thing. So you've got painted lines, at least as a demarcation here. So I can scurry across here. Then I've got some bollards now. So I've got a demarcated line. I've got a painted line, but I still want to be careful because I'm a cautious cyclist. And then we've got some bollards, and then I'm through. And that's sort of the extent of the scheme. You can see it's on the other side. If I show you just how crazy it is, and again, this is with, well, I wouldn't say it's crazy, actually. The challenge of this scheme is, in case you're recording this, is if I'm going southbound, I have to go this route, go across here, follow this route, then cross across here, cross here, cross here, then on the pavement, then I have to do a 90-degree turn to get back into this turn. So that, and then I'm back on the cycle lane as was. So that's the Sabadell model. So I'm conscious of time. Let me show you the Copenhagen one as well. That's probably the most relevant one for active travel. This one is more about pedestrian flows. So if you remember Copenhagen, and again, our clients sort of drive where we focus really, and their interest was Copenhagen station, public transport usage, confidence in you know, sort of using public transport and stuff. Again, can you guys see this? Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So you'll see again, demarcated area. We've got Copenhagen station, nothing else around it. Not trying to draw the streets or anything like that. We built this, so typically the way we build these, the ideal is if you've got a CAD model, but again, we're looking at other ways to quickly build them and so on. We had really nice feedback from the equivalent, so DBS, the equivalent to Network Rail in the UK, in Denmark, sorry, who own the stations. They loved all of this markings on the tiles. Apparently that's really, really accurate and so on. So again, those sorts of things about trying to make it recognizable and to engage people, we found it quite interesting. This is on this project, this is a big part. Most of the Sabadell thing has been us, Pixelmill, doing it. But on this one, we've done a lot of work, and we work a lot with UCL. And so UCL have got expertise in infection modeling and more complex behavioral modeling. So what this model shows is trying to introduce some of that into this rapid process, basically. So some of this, again, I'll try, if you ask questions about this, I'll do my best to explain, but ultimately the mathematical models behind some of this stuff is UCL modeling, basically. So what we can do on here is we can introduce some avatars again. Again, we've only got pedestrians this time. So the rough layout of this is you've got 6 entrances here, entrances and exits. There are actually escalators that go down to platforms. Again, the model just cuts out here, but we have them and so on. Let's start simulation, right? So we'll start to see, so you see avatars start to appear here at these spawn locations. So this is the equivalent of people coming up from the platforms, basically. Now, when I set it on this type, you'll see different colored avatars. So this is agent type. So in this, where the pedestrians before, it was all one type before. They spawned at different rates, but they all walked at the same pace. They followed slightly different destinations and so on, but there wasn't too much variation. What we're trying to show in this is different behaviors, basically. So the different colors represent slightly different profiles, again using the UCL behavioral model. So it's things like how fast people walk, how direct they go to the destination, do they stop? You'll see some of these guys looking, and that's looking at display boards and so on, again trying to make the visualization a bit richer and so on. They'll all try and avoid each other, or they all will avoid each other. Some will avoid each other by a bit more than others, again trying to capture a sort of social distancing or a nervousness and all that sort of thing. You'll see the number count again. So there's 100 avatars in the scene at the moment, as some enter and some leave, like that guy there just left. So that's the agent type, different profiles that again we could customize. In this case, it's just we were going to do commuting and tourists and so on, but our friends in Copenhagen said, oh, there aren't many tourists at the moment, so that as a profile wouldn't really be relevant, really. So you can customize them however you want. You then got two other models of exposure, and again, this is UCL type work here. Total exposure is a cumulative thing which accrues over time. Current exposure is a changing thing that changes over time. So a green avatar is someone who's not really in contact with anyone, is keeping a distance. As they sort of bump into each other, and if they get stuck for a while, you'll see the color coding change, basically. So that's the dynamic current exposure view of this. And then total is that cumulative effect of that. Hopefully you can follow. So if you start to see pinch points, then you'll see people stuck together too much where they can't really escape almost, and so they'll get a larger loading. Conscious of the time, sorry Brian, I'm going as quick on this, but hopefully it's all useful. Yeah, thanks. So that's that. What else have we got in here? Oh yeah, some of the other things that we're introducing in this. So we don't have in this one a sort of a 2B, you know, how to change it. So again, our friends in Copenhagen sort of took this to an earlier version of this to DBS, the equivalent to Network Rail, the people who run and own the stations. And so we're still trying to, like Network Rail, basically it's very complex. I know rail quite well. It's just very complex trying to change these environments and so on for safety reasons as well as commercial reasons and so on. These units, we put some logos in, but these units, I think we've got a McDonald's one somewhere. These are all still open and so on in Copenhagen. So we're trying to work with them to understand what sort of 2B options they'd like to do. So for instance, you could start to introduce, say, barrier schemes. You know, maybe you could say just barrier off this and close that junction. And this is what we're going to introduce in the next 3 or 4 weeks, just probably like tensor barriers. So we'd be able to pause the simulation and then just drag and drop barrier, barrier, barrier. And then the avatars would all then recalculate their routes. So they'd recognize there's no through route there, so they travel through a different destination. So again, in the spirit of rapids, the idea is you can quickly change something. So instead of doing it in the real world, which is complex, and you know, if you're digging up, you know, concrete, there's a load of CO2 getting emitted, loads of energy, loads of costs, loads of risk. The idea is you quickly test it in these sorts of real worlds. But again, with the caveat, nobody is saying any of this is engineering precision. This sort of quick engagement approach could then feed into a more detailed model. And I think that's it really. I think oh, the last things I'll do are just some interesting points. I mentioned the tile. I think we didn't have this in the model originally. And again, the goal is to do these things as quickly as possible so that you can iterate and test and so on. But when we sort of presented this with Copenhagen people, they said, oh, apparently it's a thing, I'll meet you at the clock. So again, you know, the Copenhagen clock, people talk of these things. So again, when you're trying to make these familiar, it's almost those sort of unexpected features that are more important than trying to get too much detail and so on. But that's let me stop and let me go take as many questions as you like. Really. Let me stop sharing my screen as well.
Brilliant, Michael. That was great. I was very excited. But my first question, and it's good like hosting as I get to ask the first question: how rapid is rapid?
So the project is one answer to it. So the project is not incredibly rapid, but is in many ways. So it started. So literally, we bid in June. It was all COVID timescales, like loads of the Innovate stuff going on in the UK and so on. We were awarded in mid-June, and we started July 1. And it runs till the end of December, you know, so a 6-month project for this sort of stuff is crazy timescales, really.
If I gave you a CAD drawing, one of my 2D engineering one, how quick did we get to that kind of rough, rapid model?
So take this with the pinch of salt, with my caveat at the start of I'm not a VR guy, but my guess is you're talking like a week or something max. To be honest, Brian, you're talking more. The challenge is more, what availability have we got with other jobs? You're talking, how do we define, a CAD model is one thing. What our guys technically have to do with a CAD model is loads of it technically is about stripping it down, because there's a load of polygons in a CAD model that don't work for those sorts of 3D models. You have to simplify it. So that's technically that's the essence of what we're doing. The challenge is more like, what's the purpose you're trying to achieve here, and therefore to achieve that purpose, what you need in the model. So if it's for citizens, you want things like that, the clock, you want those features, and that's a consultant process really to try and tease those out.
All right.
And they might not be in your CAD model as well. Very unlikely that clock is in the CAD model, to be honest. So you have to create those things separately and so on. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. That it's really handy. Well, I absolutely agree with you. We need better ways to consult and virtually, and going through 2D plans only gets you so far with people. So yeah, I often get people to SketchUps, but have a little look around and see how it all works. It's a fantastic idea. Kate, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. That was completely amazing. I thought that was brilliant, and I particularly like the sort of the architectural details. You're saying about the floor and the details that makes it feel real, which I think is really powerful. As someone who spends an awful lot of time in normal life around stations, the thing that strikes me that gets in the way of humans moving isn't individual humans. It's the wheelie case behind them. It's groups of people. It's people who stop to have a chat with somebody rather than actually going from place to place. And the kind of inclusion things around, if you put barriers in, I don't know how many people use Paddington a lot, but Paddington is characterised by you go round the corner to where you think you can get to the platform and there's a barrier and you can't get there and you've got to go back around the other way. There's something quite interesting around how people actually use the space. And on a VR one, if anyone's not aware, there's a lot of research being done around gendered effect of VR. I almost throw up with your video moving around, and I'm physically sat still in a room. It's gendered and it's unintentionally, therefore, a discriminatory technology. So anyone thinking of using VR, be super careful. I've got some really interesting papers from New Scientist over the years about this, and they think they've actually nailed the reason for it. And it's not what they thought it was about scanning the horizon, but it is incredibly important to make sure that we use different parallel technologies, not just something that women, including me, I don't get motion sick at all in real life, ever in my life, but I will throw very quickly as soon as the screen starts punning around. So just worth being aware of that. But thank you, that was amazing, really inspirational.
Thanks. That's really interesting about the VR as well. It's useful to know all that, because like I say, I'm not a VR expert. So I've ridden on the VR bike and I can't remember, it made me feel a bit queasy. But yeah, I've never really noticed any differences really, but I've never studied it, to be honest.
All right, that's all good. Sorry that we made you feel sick. Okay, that's yeah, Wookie, did you want to come in?
Yep. Hi. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is this software available, or is this just a thing that you've got and the rest of us can't have, or can only have if we pay you lots of money?
well, Pixelmill's a limited. My friend's business is a limited and for-profit enterprise, I'm afraid. So yeah, it's not open source. But the underlying stuff is, so it's Unity Technologies, which is all, it's sort of a...
The Unity game engine thing.
Yeah, that's the main thing.
Right, okay.
The actual, the sort of 3D, the graphics and stuff, the artwork is can be done in anything. I think our guys mostly use Adobe stuff, really. They use, I don't know if they use any Autodesk stuff. But
see what you could knock up with the game engine and Blender or something, and what could be done.
Yeah.
But as you say, those having those avatars modelled is probably the interesting and tricky part of this, actually, to make it work well.
Yeah, that's Unity, isn't it? The game engine stuff, it does the AI and so on.
Okay.
Oh, it's definitely a growing area. I was messing around with the Street Mix kind of 3D model the other day.
That was part of the premise, the idea behind this, that drag and drop, quick, easy Street Mix idea. Yeah, we'd seen that, I don't know, last year sometime.
Yeah, that's quality. It's really buggy, but I kind of love it to instantly show someone what a street looks like in 3D.
Yeah. Somebody's done a GitHub version where you can export Street Mix into a 3D model as well, I think.
Yeah, that's the one I was getting. Yeah, then you can just wiggle around with the model and show what you want. Yeah. It's definitely to start something special. So yeah, I'm with you on that. As I've been doing SketchUp stuff as well, and that's quite difficult. Has anybody got any Well, the questions, we got one more speaker, so we can always go back at the end if you want to ponder VR. Will do. Or maybe
Brian, just one last one from me, Brian. Just the really fascinating thing on the queasiness and VR, and what really did my head in about the VR bike was when Pixelmill did the first version of it. As soon as you turn a corner, Kate completely felt really nauseous. I felt really nauseous because my body wanted to be tipping.
Yeah.
But I was going around a corner. And now you guys have done this bike that tips just the tiniest bit.
Yeah.
So it just tips literally a few fractions, but it's enough to tell your brain that you're going around a corner. And it's really quite extraordinary how that little tweak in the system kind of works. It's amazing.
I'll give you another one on that, Steve. Is last year, I don't know if you saw it, but we did a trike. So we got, a physical trike attached as the VR bike. So obviously you don't have you'd still have a bit of whatever you call a centripetal force or whatever it is. But not, it's a more stable platform, isn't it? And so on. So the VR trike seemed to reduce it. Again, still didn't eliminate it, but seemed to make it a bit easier for people.
As a cognitive psychologist working on vision many years ago, I think that you need to get some psychologists involved in this discussion.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, we got on a different project. We've got a call with Leeds Beckett and a load of psychologists about sort of slightly different thing, really, but with a similar intention of how do you use this technology to actually sort of understand the change that you're trying to achieve, and then to embed it and all that sort of thing.
I mean, track people's eyeballs.
Yeah, I believe that's possible. Yeah, in the new sort of VR.
He's always going on about eyeball tracking, that lad. Let's move on to John Dales, because that's getting way deep. We'll do an eye tracking special led by Mark one of these weeks.
I'm going back to Brighton now.
Well, no, keep us informed. Definitely keep us posted, Mark.
Yeah.
John, Mr. Boss, are you there? Is John here to talk about school streets?
I am. I was just considering whether I should start with my own throwing up story, and I don't see why I shouldn't.
Why not?
And it was actually your fault, Brian, because
it always is.
Yeah. Some of you may remember that there was the TRL did a bunch of trials on cycle infrastructure. TfL asked TRL to do a bunch of trials out of there in Crowthorne, and I went there and I did exactly what you were just talking about there, Steve. So I was sat in this car, turned left. There was one of the things they had the virtual, they were doing. There were some actual models out on the skid pan, and they had this VR stuff. I turned left in the car. I saw it turned left. There was no sensation of turning left, and I was immediately nauseous. And over the next 3 hours, I threw up three times, around, this probably still there, around, so watch where you go, watch where you put your feet if ever out of TRL. So just to say that can happen. And also it's not, it may well be gendered, Kate, but it also got me perfectly well. So anyway, that's a brilliant introduction. I shall do the thing here, which we're always encouraged to do. I'll share the whole screen. So can you see a big red square?
Yep.
That's good. So I was asked to talk about school streets, and what I've started with is a presentation that I did a few months ago, arising from some work we were doing for Transport for London, where they were talking about getting the school streets, emergency school streets at the beginning of the pandemic. But what I'd also like to add is to some more practical considerations as well as the design considerations. And I have a certain amount of experience, and some of you will have different experience. Some of you will have a lot more, and some of you will have possibly very little at all. You may not even know too much about what school streets are. So excuse me if I'm underreaching or perhaps overreaching in some of what follows. In terms of the design considerations, you may know that if you want to have a look and you're interested in this as you're starting out, so to speak, I suspect few of you are, but just in case you are, then the School Streets website, information for parents, is quite helpful. And let's just be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about a road outside of school, or indeed a street outside of school, with a temporary restriction on motorised traffic at school drop-off and pick-up times. one of the things I want to introduce is that there's the idea of what do we mean by temporary, and you'll see a few reflections on that. The idea is obviously you're not closing the street forever. You're not closing it off. People will very often people live there, and when we talk about closure, we are in any case allowing exemptions. But whether it's just at your standard drop-off and pickup times, that's what most are today, but we could consider that it might be more than that. And there is an extent to which school streets can be the beginning, perhaps, of a low traffic neighbourhood kind of measure. There are a load of benefits. I shan't trouble you with these. I'm sure you will be able to have a look at this afterwards on the video. But health benefits, danger benefits, and the idea of independent mobility, especially for children. Of course, you'll see the next few slides now. I prepared this original presentation for Urban Design London, and therefore it's focused on London, and that's just what it is. But there's a very specifically important difference between the London condition and non-London conditions, which Bob has already referred to, and I'll touch upon a little bit later. So one of the good ways in which councils were responding to the pandemic was in thinking, okay, we could do some school streets. And actually a lot of councils were expediting work they already had in hand, and a lot of councils added to that some emergency school streets, and a lot of councils had both. They had some in hand and also did some school streets. And again, you'll see improved air quality, improved road safety, improved physical activity is how Enfield were selling that. Wandsworth, so to speak, had looked at this as well, and I just highlighted the fact there that you can see that their school street schemes from the trials that were started in June were, I say obviously, but they were a response to the pandemic. And I suppose one of the things probably worth reflecting on here is just the simple fact that somehow school streets, they are not without opposition, but there is that, and I hate to say it, but think of the kiddies is something that is helpful in terms of the dialogue. People somehow get that children, more than grown-ups, certainly more than a lycra-clad cyclists, people get that children deserve our consideration in terms of their safety and so forth. So that's worth bearing in mind, and therefore some authorities found that implementing emergency school streets was easier, in fact, at least in terms of public acceptance of it than other kinds of measure. Hackney on the left produced this wonderful toolkit which anybody can download. I highly recommend it, and have in many ways been considered the leaders in terms of the implementation of school streets. As with so much of the good stuff that Hackney does, there'll be one or two people considering that they aren't quite so preeminent, but that's the kind of healthy competition that we love to see, of course. Southwark was looking at school closures, and has been looking at school street closures as well. And you'll see that the thing that I've highlighted there at the bottom is just that idea of, okay, where do we do these exactly? Because we've got loads of schools, right? So where do we start? And I think that's an important consideration, which I'll touch upon right at the end, if that's okay. The idea of, okay, where do you start? And therefore, okay, where are they? And what kind of challenges have we got? Obviously, if the issue, or rather the principal measure you're looking at, is restricting or preventing access by traffic that doesn't have a destination in the immediate area, in the school, in the street you're trying to treat, then the more traffic there is that you have to exclude, that could be more problematic in a variety of different ways. Obviously, if you have bus routes and other things like that. Really important, I think, that we don't just think about the low-hanging fruit, because you'll probably be aware that a lot of the public discourse, a lot of it not very edifying, but about these kinds of measures, low traffic neighborhoods and so forth. They're saying, well, hang on, doesn't everybody on the big busy streets doesn't it just get worse there? And of course, there are big schools on big streets, and we do need to think about how that can happen. In terms of the work that I had been doing, golly, it's so long ago now, it's amazing how quickly the things seem to fly. It was producing this supplementary guidance for London as part of the London Street Space for London programme. Supplementary guidance on school streets, and What we were looking at there is we were tasked, to be honest, not too much of it, well, almost nothing that I'm aware of has been done in this respect. We're thinking, okay, we know what a school street is. What the standard thing is, we basically can close streets off at certain times. And you'll see there that some of the school streets are streets that have buses on, so that's possible. Of course, there are some relatively quiet streets that has buses. That's not the same as having a busy high street. We need to think about it. This is again what that TfL guidance says. You know, for many authorities reading that guidance, again, it's guidance you can download and it's perfectly applicable in most parts outside of London. That we need to think about where you start, what's the context, how. So it's not just where do you do it based on context, but what will you do based on that context. And then it does talk about the fact, okay, you may not be able to close the road, but there may be some other things you can do. So, for example, specifically in light of the pandemic, you might think generally, which is, seriously, do we need that parking right there? That just makes crossing the road more difficult. You could, for example, even on a busy road, skin out a lot of parking. You have that, put in a new crossing, make that a lot more easy to use. And the parking, the space that you take, having removed the parking, if that's what you're doing, well, we'll touch on what you might be able to do with that space. And it could be, again, could be temporary, but it could be permanent. I'll just say at this point that one of the issues about the temporary nature of school streets generally is that it can give you a practical problem of essentially putting stuff out and taking stuff back. If you are inhabiting or using or managing the space in just a temporary way, so for example, you don't allow parking in such an area, well, you can't in such and such an area during certain times, but you can park there at other times. It does imply that it's quite difficult to use that space during the restricted time, any kind of effective, if you want to put something there, you know, seating or a parklet or some play features or something like that. If you have to shift it at the end of the day or perhaps at the end of the week or just at the end of the hour, then that obviously introduces a bunch of really very practical considerations that you need to think of. So what we decided to do in this document to try and encourage people to think, okay, there are standard things you do, which is basically number one, let's get rid of the traffic. And as I've said, it's not the traffic, it's most of the traffic if you can, because there will still be access traffic in most cases to local homes and possibly local businesses and so forth. That's a thing. But what just removing the traffic does, and that's where we go on to the second thing, is what do we do with the space that we've got? Because we might remove traffic, we might possibly remove parking, as I'm just saying, but do we just have more tarmac? If we do just have more tarmac, there's one of the things that might arise for that, and notwithstanding it's about the kiddies and the people who live locally, one of the things we know is with more space in which to drive, on the whole, drivers tend to speed up a little, and that's not a good thing. But also, isn't that just a waste? Couldn't we use that for better? Couldn't we use that for what we've called here the 3 W's of walking, wheeling, and waiting? And of course, waiting is the thing that was particularly on our mind as a new thing at the beginning of the pandemic. And how can you queue in ways and wait for your child when it's in a way that's socially distanced? But to be honest, why not have more waiting space anyway? You know, we talk about the school gate, and quite often the school gate is a really narrow strip of highway, historically, with a big run of guard railing outside, which means the space is constrained. And although it might be convenient for parents and carers to wait by leaning on the guard railing, you think this is not a good public space. So when we start going on from this idea, okay, we can limit the amount of traffic, we could also potentially use the space better. Then we get onto the third thing, which is actually, couldn't we do something really fine here, something that actually it really dignifies this place, turns it not just from a bit of empty tarmac, which we're not using for the moment, and that's nice to hang around in or stand in or possibly kick you the can in, or whatever local games you used to play or kids do play now, is how about this becoming somewhere where actually people, you know, it's actually very nice. You do turn up a little bit early, you have those chats at the school gate, you don't run away out afterwards because you're still chatting, and actually the pupils, your kids, can just play there quite happily. You know, there's something for them to do. And this is a perfectly sort of thought that we should be having about the non-COVID future, as well as just the intentionally practical thing of needing more space. So just in terms of creating space, obviously we're familiar with, so if we forget just about the traffic restrictions issue and move straight onto the idea of creating space, there are all sorts of ways in which this can be done temporarily. None of these photographs are from school streets. But this kind of thing, and the thing about that is okay, but if those barriers have to go in at the end of the day, they're not great looking, but anyway, they do a job. Who does put them in? Who does put them out? How long can you keep them there? And that makes you think then about, okay, we would normally only be doing this at the beginning and end of the school, sorry, the school peaks. But if we have to, or want to put out some barriers that are temporary, well, beginning of the Monday and take them back in on the Friday would be nice, wouldn't it? Or at least put them in on the Monday, on the morning, and taking them back in the afternoon. Then there are also issues about how do we store these things and so forth. So obviously, as we're stepping up from just restricting traffic to grabbing space, there are some real issues about, do we do this just temporarily or do we do it permanently? And obviously it's kind of better in terms of use of space, not putting aside the practical issues related to getting rid of parking, for example. It's better and more conducive if you hold it permanently. So you go from grabbing space in a rubbish way to the idea of making a welcoming place in quite an easy logical step, which is it's much more easy if you don't have to keep moving it around. And so if you have it permanently, you can do a lot more with it. There are also issues that relate to, and again, none of these are outside schools, but there are issues that relate to sort of permanent stuff, which is we don't have a terrifically great track record of doing it really well. And these things can also get moved around. So you have unintentional consequences, like there are barriers you can't get over. There's space that is claimed that isn't very clear what it's for. Is that a cycle route? Is it a cycle route this way or that way? Is it, you'll probably seen some yourself. Is it a walk? Is it space for walking? Is it space for cycling? Are there signs? Are there lines? Can you get up and down the curb? Is there a ramp? Is there not? Is it a temporary ramp? Is it is more permanent tarmac, for example? So there are some negative issues with making space, just actually taking space, whether it's for physical distancing or long-term distancing, just a space to have. The idea of moving from just a time restriction on traffic access to a place that you could spend more time in, just a pleasant street, is quite a thing. And now I'll just skip through some of the things. I've just basically said all of these, and you'll be able to see it. So if you want to at your leisure when you have a look at this later on, the idea is that if you're making space for physical distancing, or as I say, hopefully in the new era of just making space for people to be in, the temporary stuff, there are a lot of practical issues we need to consider. And what you may conclude at the end of them is in fact that actually you're best off moving straight to, if you're prepared to do this, to take the space and use it better, you're best off moving straight to something that's at least semi-permanent, if not permanent. And in terms of creating a welcoming, practical place, this is a Google shot of Westgate Street in Hackney, actually. I'm familiar with this because years ago, we did a piece of work for Hackney, which is responsible for them feeling that they were comfortable getting rid of tons and tons of guard railing, but the place that, notwithstanding the fact that the tool we developed for them suggested that they could, the one place they didn't take any guard railing away from outside of school, and that was just purely the perception of it. You know, generations of parents have grown up thinking that this is the only thing that has kept our children from death, and it's a really challenging thing to do. And then you do get with him, to be perfectly honest, it's not unreasonable. You get the argument, which is, so you're getting rid of it, why? Because you think it affects the street scene and maybe how drivers drive because they think it's safer to do so. Yeah, I'd just rather keep it there because it means you don't have to worry quite so much about where the children are when we're chatting there, because we know they can't run onto the street. Now, I show this one because rather ironically, this particular school is also there's another photograph that I myself took, which is, there it is. Still lots of guard railing, but it's a school street as well, as you can see. And so that's one of the ones that's in just near London Fields in Hackney. And so there is this issue about, okay, to what extent does the guard railing help or hinder in terms of creating a welcoming place, and how important is that? In other words, if there's little traffic in there during the school hours, then perhaps you don't need the guard railing. But there's more traffic outside of the school hours. Yeah, but that's okay because there aren't any kids around at those times. So it might give us the opportunity to do that. I would certainly say that in terms of physical distancing, one of the issues, obviously the footway here is relatively wide, but one of the issues with guard railing generally is that it really hems people in, and actually can be very difficult. If you're walking along, you've experienced this, I'm sure, just walking along an ordinary street and you're trying to keep somebody's walking and you're trying to do that little dance when one of you will go into the carriageway to get past, and you just can't. There are obviously the importance of getting space for queuing. There will always be some queuing. The issues are heightened now. This is a school down in Teddington, in fact, and maybe we'll have who knows how long this will last in terms of the need to keep these sort of distancing. And I say this idea of thinking about what we're doing for COVID and how does that help us, prompt us to do stuff that we might do in the long run. Just thinking about the use of guard railing, this is a photograph again, not out of school, but it's the only one I've got like this. Actually, there was one later one actually not far from where I live in Ealing, which is the recognition that actually it's pretty meaningless to create this extra space for walking here in Greenwich Town Centre if you can't get to it. So you can see from those daubs of blacktop that guard railing was removed there, and I imagine it probably won't go back because very little does these days. Other thoughts, just more broadly about what if we are moving from that to creating a welcoming place. This is essentially what certainly outside the school gate, what the big school markings are for. Do not stop or park near the school entrance. Now they're normally time restricted, but they're obviously they're important. You think, well, really, who would park on those zigzags? And they're normally restricted for the whole of the school day, not just the school hours. And you think, okay, if that's the case, how do we step up in terms of using that space? It's relatively easy. You are not allowed to park there in any case. That's in any case. And now you think, okay, then we're getting a school street. So that's even more comfortable space. If we just start with our normal bollards, okay, let's take that. And so we're sure now there's less traffic and you can't park there. And then you start thinking, okay, well, what happens if you have you're existing, you go to the time closure, and then you start thinking, well, we can pull out a little bit more. Where those yellow zigzags are, why isn't that space that people can stand in, wait in, sit in? And then you're going to the thing, well, maybe we can just say that actually you can't, there's no traffic through here at any time. Or at the very least, it's a space you use in its entirety that only limited small numbers of vehicles can come through because they're just residents or so forth. That idea of how do you step forward once you've decided it's not just about limiting traffic, it's also about creating spaces. And lots of ways in which you might think about how you might use space like that, especially temporarily or just as trial schemes are in this document, which TfL produced a couple of years ago. But I just want to now touch on this issue. That is an ANPR camera. And one of the big issues about school streets is, okay, how do you enforce? The key thing is how do you enforce the traffic restrictions you've got? The thing about ANPR cameras is you can't actually use them outside of London at the moment. As Bob referred to, Section 6 or Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004 contains the provision for this, but there isn't the necessary secondary legislation yet for this to happen outside London. There's also the issue that these things, depending on what you kick, cost around about, I've been informed, I don't know about the buy one myself, but speaking to officers who have, cost around about 20 grand if you think of all the kit, and obviously it depends on. So that's a major consideration. On the other hand, that's a capital expenditure if you are able legally to use them. It's a capital expenditure that might save you a bunch of revenue expenditure on, for example, on stewards moving barrier backwards and forwards. So not many of these went in terms of COVID measures just because they're expensive. We didn't have the time, but actually that might be the thing that you move to in London in the shortest term. Outside of London, just for you to say that so here on the left is a letter written at the beginning of near the beginning of the pandemic from the Urban Transport Group, what used to be the Passenger Transport Executive, saying, listen, now is the time for you to enact that secondary legislation. If you're serious about this government, and this comes on, obviously this is before gear change, but it comes with all that sort of stuff, now is the time. You've got the primary legislation, it does exist, but we need more than that. And on the right, the year before, so this is before the pandemic, local government association did a research which showed that virtually, the vast majority of authorities, 9 out of 10 said they would consider using those powers if they had them. And we know that's a big issue. Until those powers are given, then obviously that's a real challenge, and local authorities outside London don't have much option but to use the barriers and stewards moving them in and out kind of thing. Just quickly, actually, I'll save you time, really. This is I was going to show you an example near where I live, except to say that these happen. It's a really good one that was put in near us. It included the creation of a one-way street. If you're worried about those two vehicles that are there seem to have gone the wrong way, well, A, they might have done, and that's putting aside, they might have done, but also this is just the day after. and the day before you could go 2 directions. So it took several days for actually the cars to turn themselves around in that one. Be glad to see that cycling is accepted in terms of that rule there. But this is another interesting consideration, and so that is exactly the same sign, and I'm just urging you to spot the difference there. And you can see that it started out as being an all-day one, and then you might be able to see that over here that's actually a sticker. And this happened because the council asked the school, or enabled schools, to pitch for what periods they wanted. And the school at the time didn't know quite what because of staggering arrival and departure times because of COVID, and also because they had a bunch of daytime things which involved people coming during the day to nurseries and stuff like that. They said, oh, I'll tell you what, give us the whole day. And so they gave them the whole day. And of course, that is quite an onerous restriction on people who live locally. The people who live locally could go through that. So, but for example, they couldn't get deliveries during normal delivery hours and so forth. So they decided to step back. And so the issue thereof, if you did want to go to a more permanent scheme, which might make a lot of sense, and many local residents might like it if it's just their cars, is how do you allow other, so the issue of how other vehicles can get their visitors, deliveries and so forth is an issue for that. And there's the kind of barrier that you do move out. Now, the key thing about that is obviously you use those if you don't have ANPR. So all of you will have to use stuff like that if you're not in London, and somebody's got to put that out and put it back. So let's just finish on some practical steps. And what it's wise to do is you start with, and again, apologies if this is teaching some of you to suck eggs, but essentially you start with a willing. And if you would go to STARS, if you're in London, TfL STARS schools or STARS Mode Shift, schools that are signed up to these programs are normally the willing and the ones that, because actually the school does have a part to play. Sadly, you might be familiar with schools, school authorities who understandably in a way say, listen, yeah, I know road safety and the environment and all these are issues, but have you seen what I've got on my plate? We're just not prepared to. Yeah, we just don't have the time resources to get involved. So start with the willing, you determine your priorities. Quite often it's primary schools, maybe large primary schools, but obviously that's just an example. It may be, well, let's start on the streets that are easiest to do, especially if it's your first time round. Always go with the low-hanging fruit first, so you get through some of the practical considerations. So start where it's easiest essentially as well. And obviously you need to consider your enforcement options outside of London. You don't really have too much of an option, but then you might need to think, okay, so are we going to use camera sign? I think a lot of in London, and while you might, if you're outside London, think, oh, that's a real shame that we can't use ANPR. To be honest, you can't really be putting the burden of the cost on ANPR on all the schemes you might be wishing to do it. It's a nice idea. So there is an extent to which you can cut your cloth accordingly. You can still do it. It just means that you need to work out how you're going to deal with the stewarding. And that again comes back to starting with to working with the willing, because in some schools you will find that the staff is very keen, the head is very happy to have the caretaker or somebody look after that, or a member of staff. And some schools, of course, are great at volunteering and others are not great at volunteering. So that's another way of thinking about, well, where do we start? Obviously, you'll need to engage with local residents and other occupiers. If you have an ANPR scheme, then you'll be needing to invite them to register for their vehicles for the whitelist, which means they'll be allowed to go through, or rather, where they're noted going through, they don't get a penalty notice. In that regard, just purely practically, it helps if you've already got a CPZ where people's cars are registered. It's just another step that doesn't take so long if that's already done. Then you would normally invite applications from schools, and you don't necessarily get it. And there's an interesting thing here, because essentially you're making a competition. This comes back to the idea of working with the willing. It's, to be honest, very hard to make a school play, or rather it's a much longer conversation if they're not willing at the moment. So in some circumstances you might find you don't want to give them any restrictions because actually you're desperate for them to take part and you don't want to give them any more hoops to jump through. But the kind of applications, or the way you might judge applications, if you've got more than you've got money for, or program, but just time for at the moment, is, well, how are you going to manage barriers? Tell us how you're going to do that. Who's going to do it? Where will you store them? And then also things like, well, are you going to have road safety on the curriculum? Because it's all very well, we don't want children to suddenly think, oh, it's great now, or parents even to think, oh, it's a school street, there are no cars around, because there will be. And so that needs to be, there needs to be some education as part of that. Then, as I've already discussed, you need to talk about when, and it could be School Peaks is conventional, that's where you start, perhaps then from the beginning of the first one to the end of the other one, or perhaps just all week. And again, that will possibly depend on the feedback you get in the local area from residents. They might be perfectly happy if it's easy, if they get a quiet street out of it, and the deliveries are fairly easily done because they can park nearby or whatever, that might be possible. Then you've got to design the scheme. All I'll say is that it's surprising how internal networks don't work. The school travel teams, which will normally lead this kind of work, often have an appalling relationship with their engineers. Or I say appalling relationship, just have a very distant relationship. So how this translate from a good idea and concept to measures on the street, especially at times when we're working remotely, I think that can be quite challenging. So we need to make sure that this idea doesn't go cold, because the people ending up designing don't really have a feel for it. They haven't been involved. They do a standard job. They don't think about the practicalities of what, hang on, how many signs do we need? We wouldn't know. We normally only need 2 or 3. Yeah, but people having to get used to this. It's not, as you know, a standard one-way system or whatever. So how does that work out? Very important that there be a program of resources for children, for their parents, and for teachers as well. You know, so what's going on here? That will obviously be much easier if we go back to the beginning there, and you've got star schools that are prepared to play, so to speak, and whose parents and parent body are probably used to the kind of things that come with being a star school. You know, they've heard this before. Sustainable transport is a thing for them. And then you need to think about, okay, well, some of the practicalities about stewards. I've heard cases of sponsorship. You might have local companies that do that. Interestingly, in one case that I know of, the footway was restricted, and it will be for a little while, because of a major house building project, which is actually a local authority project. And they got the house builder there, said, okay, yeah, well, we'll give a person, oh, hang on, actually, it's difficult for us to actually give a person. I'll tell you what we'll do, we'll pay for a steward. So that can happen as well, and maybe you do get sponsorship. And in that case, what's kind of interesting is that they actually, in a couple of schools, I know that they've hired the people who used to do the crossing that isn't done anymore. So these are people who love that kind of thing, are familiar with it. And so that's an opportunity as well. There's then the thing about, especially if you're doing physical measures, the barriers and so forth, if it's not permanent and you don't have ANPR, the long-term sustainability is really an issue. You can be awash with volunteers when it starts in the summer term, and people are keen. Then a couple of key individuals move away, perhaps, or the weather gets cold or whatever. You really need to think about how that will go into the future. That comes back in a sense to how when you're asking for applications, or you're engaging with schools about how can we sustain this. And perhaps the thing is, in the long term, in London, certainly you think, okay, we just need to be ramping this up to ANPR, because we can see that there are likely to be problems. We don't want to get caught out by the fact we have to take this out because we just haven't got anybody to do the barrier anymore. And we as a local authority don't have the revenue expenditure to pay for that. But we can bid for money for ANPR outside of London. Just keep lobbying for the Part 6 to be enacted. I'll leave you with this, which is a photograph I took years and years and years and years ago, and I'm glad it's come back to that. I thought it was a fantastic piece of advertising from Weetabix, and they should run it again, because this is what we're trying to do. Is, you know, what we talk about school run, which sadly normally means, you know, in people's minds is dropping kids off on short trips. Let's turn it into a stroll, or a trundle if you must. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Cheers, John. Yeah, we've kind of run totally out of time for questions, but I kind of think you covered a lot of stuff in there, and we could always pick it up last week. I wonder.
That was my plan all along.
Yeah, no, it's always like it when it overruns. Yeah, but I'm going to run straight to the last word section. I'm told Ruth wants to show us something for the kind of last word, and I do like. Maybe I should always let Ruth have the last word, because she does pretty good ones. Ruth, have you got an exciting thing to show us?
This is my Dutch school.
I was going to say, you nicked it from the Netherlands, didn't you?
It's a Dutch school bollard, which Jan bought for me, but I daren't put it down the street because I think council might remove it, like they removed that sign. But they have those in quite a few places.
Well, there you go. That's the way to end things, I think. Yeah. Oh, well, you booked yourself a special slot now, Ruth. Too good. All right, everybody. Let's call it a day then. Sorry, there's no time for questions, but it was all good stuff. Yeah, that was brilliant. And yeah, just Mike had to apologise. His dinner was waiting and it was getting all cold, so I told him to run off and do that. But yeah, that was good 3D modeling stuff as well. So we'll see you all next week. Going to get a bit academic next week, but you know, we all need stats and evidence, don't we? Of course we do. All right, see you all later.
Thanks everyone.
Cheerio. Cheers.
Cheers all.